Episode 223.
Hi, I'm Scott Langdon, and this week on God and Autobiography, the podcast, Jerry welcomes back Dr. Michael Poliakoff for a brand new edition of the Life Wisdom Project. In this episode, Jerry and Michael have a beautiful discussion about episode 25. I ask about God's history with the people of Israel. Michael always brings such a beautiful insight into the Jewish tradition. And in this discussion about God and Israel, he and Jerry share their thoughts about what God continues to be up to, as he calls us each to look deeply into the other. Remember, if you enjoy our work, please like it, subscribe to it, and share it with anyone you think might like it. I hope you enjoy the episode. I'll see you next time.
Oh, hello, Michael.
Hi, Jerry. Okay, we are connected.
I can see you. I can hear you.
Excellent. Excellent.
This is great. I think the episode you and I are going to discuss, try to see what the life wisdom implications are, episode 25, but it goes, I think, maybe the longest episode in the whole thing that we're putting on podcast, which is excerpts. This is excerpts from 3 different chapters, going all the way from the Jews as slaves in Egypt crying out to the Lord, to Jeremiah and the prophets, and,
Right. Yes.
and that whole drama. And then there's some other things where I'm asking about Ten Commandments style ethics compared to Confucian ethics, which I'd also read and prayed about a little bit, I guess, by this point. But anyway, I do think it's a very rich episode, rich set of communication, dialogue between me and God on these very interesting texts.
Yes, indeed. And I'm so glad you brought Confucius, or God brought Confucius into this dialogue.
Yes. Confucius, I always feel, is the Eastern Aristotle, since I'm a big Aristotle fan. And a Confucian friend I've gotten to know through American Academy of Religion, Ben Song, agrees with me. He started reading the Western stuff, and wow, Aristotle, this is really great. So yeah, Confucian is a thinker I've always read. You might say carried by my side a bit, the way I carry Aristotle's Ethics by my side as my guide to how to live. That was all before my religious turn, but they're still awfully good.
Yes.
Even after you're talking to God, because God's working through all these things.
Yes.
But anyway, what struck you? When I went through, I must have found a dozen things that I thought, this is an implication, especially if you kind of broaden it a little. Most people don't have my sense of my vibrant sense from my own experience of a personal God and God issuing commands and so forth. And so I always encourage people, you don't have to have that. I have that, and of course I believe it, and so on. But I always just encourage people to think of other sources of ideality. What's the highest you can think of, and of people you love, institutions, communities you care about, and think about what God says in reference to those things. Let them stand in.
I've been trying to steep myself more and more in the works of Emmanuel Levinas.
Yes.
Precisely for that reason, that we cannot be who we are without our embrace, our interaction, our understanding of the other. And it actually has an extraordinary application in a book by Bernard-Henri Lévy that I have come to admire so much, called The Genius of Judaism. I don't know.
Really?
If you're familiar with that one.
I will tell Abigail. Abigail is a great fan of Levinas, whom she studied for years, been to Levinas conferences. She likes Levi. And the what of Judaism?
It's called the Genius of Judaism.
The Genius.
And this was part of Bernard Henri's movement from Barbarism with a Human Face, which was that great bestseller. And
okay.
as he said, I knew something was lacking. And at that point, he began to study himself with Levinas. They were
Oh,
very,
really?
very close friends, really until the end of Levinas's life. And in this book, he embraces a new reading of the book of Jonah. Why Nineveh?
Okay. But let me back up, and then we'll come back to why Nineveh. But I'm thinking our listeners aren't all familiar with these people, and I only read a little Levinas, but maybe you can just give us a 1 or 2 sentence statement of who Levinas is or was. He's now deceased, but he was alive during my lifetime.
One of several Jewish pupils of Martin Heidegger, who absorbed the method of and the instinct to use phenomenology. Of course, that was not invented by Heidegger, um, in a way to interpret deeply the traditions. And of course, they broke with him. Hans Jonas and Levinas actually confronted him about the appalling way that he had so misused the traditions.
Yeah,
And
well, he became a big Nazi.
yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
right.
Um,
And a strange perversion.
and
But
Levinas, of course, was an Orthodox Jew and digs deeply into the Talmud with very, very deep interpretation of its intricacies.
and
And one of his great contributions is that what really can define us as as not just religious people, but as people of God, is to understand that there's something within us that is not something that even in philosophy that we can easily reconcile. Um, I brought him along because I thought we might
okay.
actually
Yeah.
get to
And
that.
explain a little, Michael, how the concept of the other emerges in Levinas, because I think it's very relevant to episode 25, in fact.
It's rather a rejection of Heidegger too, in a way that I find really quite brilliant. That uh, being there, Dasein, the great Heideggerian term, is utterly incomplete. It misses the point without our connection to the other for the value of everybody.
Mhm.
And I was going to read a brief passage. Let's see. This is desire for what is beyond satisfaction and which does not identify, as need does, a term or an end, a desire without end, from beyond being, disinterestedness, transcendence, desire for the good,
Mhm.
something that, and Levinas does make the case that this is something that in rigorous philosophical examination stands the test of that kind of scrutiny, but that it's something that really takes us outside the realm of the kind of logical steps that hitherto had been recognized. And things like embracing the other, um, which are disinterested. They're not your authenticity as an individual. You're a
Right.
real and deep. They are a real and deeper authenticity. That's that's an extraordinary breakthrough. And he goes on to say, love is only possible through the idea of the infinite, through the infinite placed in me, by the more that ravages and wakes up the less, turning away from teleology and destroying the time and happiness of the end.
Mhm.
There's an immediacy and an applicability there that's just really quite wondrous.
Yeah. And then you were about to mention, before I wanted you to give this background about Levinas, who's an extraordinarily important thinker in the 20th century, not just for Jews, but for everyone. He's had a major impact because of this concept of the other in the human face. You see another. That's the phenomenology. You move around the world. What do you encounter? Well, you encounter people, and how do you encounter them? By their face, and you look into their eyes, and you see, and as you put it, Michael, it's not just me. It's not just my authenticity, my personal authenticity that's at issue here. That's radically truncated as an understanding of what you're doing in the world. You encounter the other, and there are whole other dimensions. You're about to move on to Bernard-Henri Lévy's raising the question in this most recent book, I guess, about Jonah. Jonah is sent into the whale, and he's on his way to Nineveh. And they're unbelievers, right?
Yes, they're bad people.
Bad people, yes.
They're going to be the enemies of Israel. They're dangerous people. Yeah. And Jonah knows this.
Yeah.
And yet God pushes him to the absolute limits. And then plays a educational trick on him. You worried about a gourd? And you're not worried about the city full of people, and even that last line, and many animals.
Yes.
This is the God that I think is so wonderful in your conversations, that God isn't owned by anybody, not even by humanity. God is so far beyond that. And the thing that I love about Bernard Henri's book, it's not a recent one, I mean, it's been out for a while, is that he really wrestles with this concept. It's an entire chapter. What does it mean to be a chosen people? Mm-hmm. And of course, in God and Autobiography, God makes it clear that he's chosen a lot of people.
Right.
A lot of important viewpoints, and they actually align. It certainly, there are examples of it becoming corrupted and perverse and murderous, but at the essence, all are seekers, and all of that is welcome. It takes me back to my Hebrew school days, the beginning of Pirkei Avot, which starts, all Israel has a place in the world to come, which sounds rather parochial. And the rabbis glossed it immediately. What that means is all righteous people have a place be'olam haba, in the world to come. Mm-hmm. The universalist viewpoint, and Genesis makes it clear that human beings came before there were Jews.
Yes.
The Noahide covenant is about what basic righteousness is. And so once again, I admire so much your approach to religion without walls.
Yeah, because God told me to go read these foundational scriptures, the ancient scriptures of all these different religions, including one, well, it comes up here a bit, I think, of Egypt. But the scriptures of Egypt, the Zoroastrian thing, which has no living tradition because they kept being wiped out by armies that came through Persia. It was once a major religion, but only a remnant remained, and they're rather walled up into themselves. But all of these religions. And then the question for me that I was guided to ask in prayer was, God, what were you up to with these people, with the ancient Egyptians, with the ancient Chinese, and so on around the globe? And it turns out what they record in the scriptures was, you might say, the aspect of God relevant to them, and that they were able to pick up on and make something of, and hence Confucius or the various other Chinese traditions are responses to the divine presence to them.
I just want to read one of the short passages from Bernard Henri's book. Reading the Jewish text, reading it as it should be read, is to generate a universal that is obviously not the extensive one of the Catholics, or, upon reflection, the intensive or radiant one of Levinas, of which I too have often made use in my work. This is the other universal that escorts human beings on the path of their history and to the center of their substance. I propose to call by a new name the secret universal, because that is ultimately what the story of the treasured people is really about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I at times envy you being a philosopher, Jerry. I just had to kind of stumble into this piecemeal.
Yeah. No. Yes. 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 Exactly. Well, in terms of what I'm told in episode 25, were there particular passages that struck you?
Oh, a bunch of them, Jerry, but I circled a few.
Okay.
Do not discount arbitrary rituals as
Mm.
mere behavior. Outward observance, when it reflects inner yielding, is useful and appropriate. And that, of course, is so central within Jewish vision that we try in our poor mortal way to make concrete the metaphorical and the visionary, and hence rituals like putting on the tefillin, where it says in Deuteronomy, "You shall bind them as a sign upon your hands, and they shall be for frontlets between your eyes." That to me is a metaphor, but when one wraps the tefillin on the arm and recites that passage from Hosea, I will betroth you to myself in righteousness. It's a tangible, physical reminder. And so we do these things that could easily be dismissed as arbitrary, but they reinforce the things that are so very, very important. And people will have different rituals. That's, of course, writ large. Uh, but they are meaningful things when they are accompanied by a sense of kavanah, of intention. Why am I doing this? What what does it mean? What are the values that I take from it?
The example God gives to me is a very simple one. The Confucians also had this heavy emphasis on ritual, but the example God gives to me is sending a thank you note.
Yes.
One can think of the courtesies of life. Those are little rituals, aren't they? When you offer someone else your seat, or you place the elder in the family at the head of the table, or they're all kinds of good manners. You offer food to someone before you eat it yourself, and these are these courtesies of life, and they occur in business and with next door neighbors and so on, are not trivial, but they're almost well, I started to say the glue, but that's not adequate because it's dynamic. They're they provide a lot of the energy toward our, you might say, idealized selves.
As you know, Jerry, I'm way too busy now. I've
I
lost
know.
control of my life, but one of the things I do each day is I get off at Farragut West and walk to the office of this organization that you founded with such insight in 1995, 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's a long time ago, and it's so wonderful that you're carrying it to greater heights than I could have even imagined when we started
Oh,
with
you
all
you laid a
three-person office.
you laid a brilliant foundation, and I just put some furniture into it. But as I walk down Connecticut Avenue, since I'm kind of a schlumper and don't, haven't blocked out that time to pray quietly in a quiet place, I take literally, again, from Deuteronomy, and these words shall be in your heart. You talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk along your way. And so as I walk down Connecticut Avenue, I take some moments to thank God for this extraordinary world and the extraordinary privilege of living in it, and to pray that I can be a good steward of it, that I can live up to these extraordinary gifts that have come to us. As it says in Jewish prayer, every season, every day, every hour. And the moment we lose that gratitude, we slip into this selfishness that, our authenticity is us, rather than recognizing the face of the other, the spiritual gifts that have been given to us, and the obligation to develop those things.
I was talking about David from the Old Testament as you go through this, skipping through the New Testament, you might say. David is all too human, but understands power, has ample personal skills, and is willing to fight. And he feels the pull of the Lord, and that is his challenge, the challenge of David, not to indulge himself and appropriate his talent and opportunities solely for himself, but to use them for me, and we might add, as we're drawing life wisdom for everyday use, out to use them for somebody, to use them for other people, for communities, for institutions we care about, for values that are abiding, are more than just my values, what I care about today, but are more abiding than that. To use your talents and the other gifts this situation you're born into life and the opportunities that gives you, to use those for these various wonderful purposes way beyond just your own self-indulgence.
Exactly. And of course, it touches base with a beautiful prayer in the Jewish daily liturgy. Blessed is God who endowed humankind with reason. And obviously, what follows from that is the obligation to use that wonderful gift.
Yeah, no, I was just reading an interesting article on the two Abrahams, it's called, by Adam Kirsch in the Jewish Review of Books, that a permanent part of, you might say, Jewish existence is, on the one hand, the Abraham of faith. And, one always has to be faithful in ways that often don't seem to make sense. One of the hostages just released, a lovely woman, kept kosher, wouldn't eat food that was not kosher, and kept the practices under these horrible conditions, under tunnels and so forth. So one has to do that. You have to keep to what your personal ideals are. And if it's Jewish, there are a set of practices she has inculcated that maintain her Jewish existence and thereby a constant relationship with God. I had friends, they're Catholics, who said early on when I was having these experiences, and I was talking because the couple was very helpful. They knew a lot about spiritual life. And they said, I think about God all the time, one of them said. And I thought, well, gee, I'm not really at all up to that. On the other hand, I then realized I kept reflecting on that. There is a second way of having God in your mind that's sort of like the way gravity is on your mind.
Mhm.
You don't never you rarely explicitly think about gravity, but every time you step off the edge of the sidewalk or the poor, you're very aware of it, or look down from a tall building, you're very aware of it. Just, well, you keep your body upright by your body's awareness of which way gravity pulls you. And in that way, I'm absolutely aware of God all the time. The rubric of my being, and not just the rubric of my being, but more intimately than that, uh, the purposes of my life are intertwined with the divine backdrop, you might say.
There's a really beautiful Hasidic concept of sanctification, that sanctification of things that could otherwise be entirely secular. Um, your table can be a place where you just eat like any organism, or it can be an altar where you sanctify that act. Um, a, um, a strip of leather can be something that you make shoes out of, or it can make tefillin.
Yes.
And to think consciously about, every act, is this an act of sanctification? It is a wonderful way to view the world. I can't begin to say that I'm anywhere near it.
But even for you in your moments of distraction, because you're busy in the hurly-burly of the world,
Yeah.
um, that's an ever-present awareness, I would guess, that ideally this would be we would be sanctifying this moment, a
And,
bit like that sense of gravity.
even Connecticut Avenue with the sirens and the horns, everything else can be a place that has a little bit of sanctification.
Yes, that's right. And so that's important to look for those opportunities in one's own life, and especially um, to keep that background awareness, but and of what your own life's highest purposes might be. There's always the question, something I emphasize in my new book, Radically Personal, um, of what is my right path? Because, God is marking out the right path in the Old Testament for the people of Israel to develop this relationship. He's marking out their path. With Confucius and his folks, he's marking out a different path, and that's fine, because that's also a divine path. But for a given individual, it's more personal than that, because, I started the organization you're now leading. At the time, I felt this was the most, the things I could do that would be worth my time and that sort of had my name on it, you might say. This was the thing. And so I left whatever I was doing before and started this. Started the organization you now run, because I thought I could make an important contribution there. In my own mind, it's never, I have to go change the world. Young people tend to be very heady with that sort of global, historic moment idealization. But no, most of our lives are in a smaller compass. And the question, that's fine. It may be just getting your kids off to kindergarten. But you need to do that. If that is the purpose you have at this moment, in your unfolding story, with God as a benign presence and maybe partner.
I can only say absolutely, yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, maybe that's a good place to stop. There's much more here, but these podcasts need to be kind of short. And I think this has been very interesting, Michael. So,
It is. I've never had a conversation with you, Jerry, that hasn't
well,
at
I
depth.
know.
So I
Well,
value the opportunity.
yeah, yeah. Well, we haven't touched the full range of your scholarly background. Your I deal with the people in the religion community all the time because of my new work, uh, and they're bizarrely unaware and don't make use of the wisdom of the pagan world.
Mm, mm.
And being a classicist, you're also steeped in that. They don't know Plato. very well. They've usually read it the way, a person does casually. Plato's in the background, the Stoics, they may not have read it all,
Right.
and these other sources of wisdom, the literature, they're somewhat aware. Everybody knows Oedipus, but those are such rich sources.
They are indeed. If I may just go on for 1 minute more.
Yes, please do.
Confucius, I just want to share my favorite analect, which probably was not from the pen of the master. It's just two
That's
characters.
how these texts are.
I think it's in book 11, but I'm not quite sure of that. Born the same, habits differ. It's very Aristotelian in the emphasis on the habits that shape you.
Yes.
There's a wonderful recognition of common humanity, and then the need for self-discipline and restraint and all of those other things that we've been talking about not very long ago.
Yes, habits, and in Aristotle, virtues are habits. They're
Yes.
good habits, basically. The honest person is habitually honest, and it doesn't require a great act of will to be honest if you really have the virtue of honesty, because it's your habitual behavior that would be very in line with Confucian thinking, and it seems very sound to me. And at a social level, traditions are the habits, and if they're good habits, virtues of a culture, of civilization.
Yes.
And important to keep going the way other good habits are.
Yes, indeed. Well, be well, my friend.
Thank you for fitting this in, and I hope we haven't taken your last tiny modicum of strength here. But
No, I could not think of a better thing to do on Shabbat after synagogue. So I thank you for that.
Good. Well, thank you, Michael. You be well, and we'll keep in touch.
For sure. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.